Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are continuing their blitz across key swing states such as Georgia, Michigan and North Carolina as they press for any possible advantage in the closing hours of the campaign. Yes, our big focus remains on the US elections. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. Thanks for being with us on this special coverage. We're building up, of course, to voting day in the US. The latest numbers reveal that more than 78 million voters in America have already cast their votes. Let's quickly take a look at the latest rallies of Trump and Harris as they build up to voting day and they make their final pitches, particularly in the swing states.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are pushing their closing messages to voters on their last day of campaigning before America decides its next president. Both candidates are in a final sprint across key battleground states, with Harris to campaign in Pennsylvania today and Trump heading to North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. On Sunday, Harris vowed to do everything in her power to end the war in Gaza, while Trump made claims, without providing any evidence, of election fraud in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump's final Georgia rally filled the Atrium Health Amphitheater in the city of Macon on Sunday, with early voting tallies showing that supporters from the state's middle could prove to be decisive in the waning days of the election. Sticking to familiar themes, the former president said he would invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1790 and would pursue the death penalty for undocumented immigrants who kill an American.
The day I take the oath of office, the migrant invasion ends and the restoration of our country begins.
Kamala Harris pledged to do everything in her power to end the war in Gaza in her final rally in Michigan on Sunday, as she attempted to appeal to the state's large Arab American and Muslim American population 2 days out from the election.
As president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza.
With Harris and the former president essentially tied in Michigan, a drop in voting numbers for either could be critical, and Harris made a clear appeal at the beginning of her speech. The polls suggest the race is still exceptionally close and more than 75 million people have already voted. Bureau Report Newsx.
And of course, even as this key swing, of course, continues, and of course also the campaigning, of course, continues. Let's, of course, also open it up to our special guests who are joining us live. Manju Seth, former diplomat, is live with us. Lord Rami Ranger, House of Lords of the United Kingdom, is also joining us live. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joins us live. Rohan Gunaratna, Middle East expert, is live with us on the broadcast as well. Bradley Thayer, author at Center for Security Policy, is joining us live. Daniel Wagner, CEO, Country Risk Solutions, also joins the broadcast. Welcome all of you and thank you very much for being with us today. Ambassador Seth, let me begin with you first. It's going down to the wire. What is going to be the X factor that could possibly sway the result for either side?
It will be very difficult to say so, because at the moment, all polls are saying it is neck to neck, and she's ahead sometimes, and he's ahead sometimes, Donald Trump. So it's becoming a very tight and keenly contested election, and I think it could go either way. It's a very, very tight race. And the role, I didn't get the second part of your question. Can you repeat that again, please?
Yes, it was on the X factors. What do you believe are the determining issues, the main, reasons why the swing states could swing a particular way?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons is that the two wars have become major issues. Immigration has become a major issue, and this could go either way, because now both sides are giving their policies on this. And Donald Trump has said clearly he will stop illegal immigration. And it's interesting that while the Democrats have opened up and said we will allow more immigration, but they've also carefully said illegal immigration they will not allow, and they would encourage legal immigration. Healthcare, education, these are all main issues that would really impact even in the swing states. And of course, the Indian American community and the other communities of different, the Hispanics, the black community, all of these are important in all these swing states. And I think they will as we know that some of them were supporters of the Democrats, but even there we have seen that there are some who are thinking either they are, undecided at the moment, or they're also going towards Donald Trump for various reasons. And I think one of the main issues is the two wars that have sort of alienated or angered all young Americans especially, and because their jobs are impacted, their whole future is impacted, and they're really very unhappy with the way things have gone in the last 4 years. So I think this will be another issue. The war will be another issue that will play a major role even in these main swing states. Okay.
Rami Ranger, let me quickly draw you in here, Lord Ranger, on, of course, this election. It's going down to the wire, certainly, of course, but do you believe that the silent voter could be crucial? Those who are, of course, not speaking right now, but will cast their ballot very soon, or have already done so, who could they end up favouring? That is, of course, the big question, Lord Ranger. And also, how is the UK viewing this election? What's the perspective there on ground?
People can come and go, but allies remain steadfast. UK and USA are very strong allies. So the government can change, but the strategy and the relationship will remain steadfast. You rightly said the election is very close to call, and it will be decided by the undecided voters at the last minute, because both candidates have tremendous appeal to big sections of American population, and the war is a very big factor. Second factor is the economy, and third factor is immigration, and fourth factor is law and order, which is really going down the drain in USA. So therefore, there are many factors which will influence the voters. And as far as UK-USA relationship are concerned, they are, nearly 200 years old, and people have come and gone, and nothing matters. So we are the closest allies, speak the same language, we have common history and common values. Therefore, our relationship will remain undisturbed no matter who is in the White House.
Okay, let me in fact quickly also then take that across to you, Professor Nalapath, on, of course, what it's going to come down to. Of course, the swing states right now are pretty much, of course, what it's going to all boil down to. Which of those states do you believe are the most unpredictable currently? And Professor Nalapath, as far as India is concerned, what is the Indian viewpoint on this election? Who's going to be a better friend of India in the White House? And how should Indians be viewing this US presidential poll, which is going to be perhaps the most closely contested ones?
Well, Uday, I'd like to say that I always believe that in a close contest, the side that makes the most self-goals or does better than the side that does basically does not make a, that they do, frankly, much worse than the side that is not going to go in and create a goal in its own through its own goalpost. Now, the problem with Kamala Harris is that, Waltz is a very poor choice of vice president. And all kinds of stories are surfacing about him. Social media has been weaponized for the last 2 or 3 election cycles. And you're seeing that weaponization in full play in the United States. And you're seeing so many videos about Waltz in China. But that time, of course, China was an ally. But those videos are being surfacing now. So the question is whether an unscripted Trump will prevail in the minds of American voters over a highly scripted Kamala Harris. And as you said, she's very closely associated with the Ukraine war. She has talked about ending Gaza. She hasn't talked about how it's going to happen. So frankly, these are questions that will also need to be asked. Whereas Trump is crystal clear on a lot of the issues. So I would only like to say that the advantage that Kamala Harris has got is that Democrats have got a formidable ground game. And in an election, of course, a ground game counts for an awful lot. So Trump I'm not sure that his ground game is as good as Kamala Harris's. Otherwise, frankly, that kind of a gaffe made by that comedian against the, Puerto Rico and by implication Latino community, it would never have happened. But certainly, that is an advantage that Kamala Harris has got. So yes, Ambassador Seth is right on points that it is a very close election. Thank you.
Okay, Rohan Gunaratna, come in here on, of course, the Middle East, because you're, of course, an expert on Middle East affairs. I have to ask you, Rohan Gunaratna, what is going to be the impact of the conflict in the Middle East on this election and the positions the two candidates have taken on the Middle East, and what you believe, of course, will be the impact this election result will have on the war ahead?
Yes, so the Middle East is extremely
Rohan
important.
Gunaratna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I think we've lost Rohan's connection, unfortunately. But yes, Bradley Thayer, you'd like to take that?
Yes, happy to do
with respect to the Middle East, so it's my pleasure to join you.
I'll just come. I'm coming to you, Daniel, in a second. Yes, Bradley, please go ahead. And I'd like you to, since you're coming in, Bradley, we'd like you to weigh in, of course, yes, on the Middle East conflict, but also on the Russia-Ukraine war, which also is a war that, of course, has also come up in the election rhetoric, and also perhaps whoever comes in the White House will have an impact on that war going ahead as well.
Well, indeed, there are sharp differences between Harris and Trump on the Middle East and on Ukraine, as well as on China. So with respect to the Middle East, the differences are Harris would continue Biden's policies with respect to Iran and the pressure on Israel that Biden has continued, whereas Trump would do the reverse of that in the Middle East, would work very closely with Israel and work to pressure Iran accordingly. With respect to Ukraine, Harris would continue Biden's policies of that is sustaining the war, feeding essentially Ukraine with the financial, with the military, with the diplomatic support, and running the risk, of course, of increasing escalation of that conflict. Whereas Trump has said explicitly that he will work to end that war, and that will be one of his first priorities if he were to come into office on January 20th, 2025. I would just add, of course, finally on China, very importantly, of course, for Indian and American audiences, that again, Harris is quite likely to continue Biden's policies of engagement with the Chinese Communist Party. And Trump is quite likely, almost assuredly, will be very tough on trade, investment, and on security elements against the People's Republic of China. So stark differences in foreign policy, major foreign policy issues between Harris and Trump.
Yes, absolutely. Let me, in fact, quickly also address some news coming in this hour before I go across to Daniel Wagner. Ahead of the much anticipated US presidential election results, a record-breaking 78 million early voters have already cast their vote. So that's the big breaking news coming in. 78 million early voters have already cast their vote. That's a pretty record-breaking figure, isn't it, Daniel Wagner? 78 million Americans have already cast their vote. Yes, that's Daniel, can you hear me? Daniel Wagner?
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, Daniel, pretty staggering figure. Records being broken, of course. 78 million early voters have cast their mandate. What do you make of that figure? And also, yes, I'd like you to weigh in on the impact of the conflict as well that you were just speaking about before we interrupted you.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, this record number of 78 million is there for a reason. And that is because really, since Mr. Trump went down the escalator in 2015, it's been all Trump all the time, 24/7 for the last 8 or 9 years. And Americans certainly understand the importance of this election. Now, many states have mail ballot only voting, which means they will have voted well before Tuesday. And this number is reflective of that. But if this number, in fact, is reflective of how engaged voters are, the question ultimately becomes, who is voting? Is this a Trump voter? Is this a Harris voter? Is it men? Is it women? Is it young? Is it old? And that's what we don't know. We know that voters in general are engaged in this process, but what we don't know is the composition of who is voting. If it's more women, it's better for Harris. If it's more men, it's probably better for Trump. If it's younger men who Trump has successfully engaged, probably better for Trump. If it's progressives, it's probably better for Harris. So we just don't know at this point. It is a good sign, however, because the message that voters need to get out and vote has been received. And I think most Americans understand the gravity of this election. Now, on the rest of the world, I concur with many of the things the previous speaker just said. And that is that the policy of engagement with Ukraine and support for Ukraine is very likely to continue under Harris administration. The question is, what is the composition of the Congress? Is the composition of the Congress going to allow her to continue? If, for example, as is expected, the Republicans take the Senate, but the Democrats take the House, we have a divided Congress. What does that imply then for the likely success of a Harris administration or a Trump administration wanting to pursue their policies? Clearly, Trump doesn't want to continue to fund Ukraine. Harris does. We just don't know. On China, I think either way, there's going to continue to be engagement with China, and the idea of cooperation and collaboration where there can be, but otherwise a policy of conflict and competition between the two countries. And that is a legacy from the Trump administration, which is not going to die. That is something that is a permanent fixture in the American political psyche now. As for the Middle East, I also concur with some of the prior comments that were made, which is that support for Israel is ironclad. It's not going to change no matter who is in the White House. The question is, what are the potential impacts? I don't see, regardless of who gets into the White House, any substantial change in support for Israel.
Yes. Okay. Let me take that back across to you now, Ambassador Manju Seth, on of course the Indian viewpoint as well. What should Indians be? How should Indians be viewing this election, and who will be a better friend of India, whatever the outcome is?
I think the only plus point in all this is that both sides have expressed a positive, sort of given a positive spin to their to the projected relationship between India and the US. So I think both of them support, both Republicans and Democrats support good relations with India. They understand that India will be their sort of partner, and they are looking at continuing this partnership, including, if you look at Donald Trump's statements, he has made some very positive statements, and as have the Democrats and Kamala Harris as well. They are looking at a strong relationship with India, and I think we will work with whoever is there. And we've had so far fairly good working relationship with both the Biden administration and when Trump was there with his administration. So I think though there are some positives in both, and when the Biden administration was in power, has been in power right now. We have seen many fast track developments compared to Donald Trump's time. But yes, they have also been positive and been beneficial, mutually beneficial. And any government or any whoever comes to power will also ensure, yes, they will first ensure their own interest, their own self-interest. And if they converge, the interests of both India and US converge on various issues, it will definitely be strong under whichever administration comes in. And we have seen that in recent times, though we've had very good working relationship with the US government, there have been some pinpricks here and there. So those, we don't know how it will pan out in the future, because if Kamala Harris comes in, I don't know if she will carry on the same policy of the Biden administration of a positive relationship, very positive relationship, but at the same time, a little bit of pinpricking here and there. We don't know. I think that's to keep the balance, I think. But yes, whoever comes to power, I see a good partnership, a good relationship between India and the US. Okay.
Daniel Wagner, on the swing states, which do you believe is currently looking the most unpredictable? Which are the states it's going to boil down to from your your assessment so far, which could of course sway the mandate one way or the other?
Well, the question is, are polls to be believed? And polls have been notoriously wrong through many elections in America in the recent past. So the one swing state that everyone agrees is absolutely critical and absolutely pivotal is Pennsylvania. And that's because it has 19 votes. And that could swing the election one way or the other, and it's on an absolute knife edge. Question is, will voters ultimately decide in a few counties in Pennsylvania, which may ultimately swing this election, to support Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris? And in my mind, there's no way to predict which way that's going to go. It could go either way, not only in Pennsylvania, but in so many of the other swing states, in Wisconsin, in North Carolina, Arizona. We just don't know. And if you've been able to look at US media in the last weeks and especially the last days, you'll see that the majority of political pundits also don't know, and they're hesitating to suggest which way it may go. The irony in this whole thing is that because of the swing states, it almost doesn't matter which way 99.9% of American voters vote, because the outcome of the election is preordained. Most of the states, we know exactly whether they're going Republican or Democratic. It's those swing states where we don't know which way they're going to go. And in many of those cases, it ultimately boils down to a few thousand voters in a few places that will ultimately decide the course of this election.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapat, quickly coming back across to you. Interestingly, that was a point that Daniel just made, that polls in the US have gone horribly wrong. We've seen exit polls in India too in the recent past, of course, vis-a-vis the Lok Sabha general elections and the recent Haryana state elections where exit polls were proven wrong. How accurate are these surveys and exit polls going to be for the US? What's your hunch? Should they be taken with a pinch of salt?
Uday, I want to point out one factor. And I've seen reports that, for example, a Chinese national voted in the election. And the only reason why he was found out was because he wanted his ballot back out of fear that possibly, like in China, your name is on the ballot, so he may be identified and possibly deported. So he tried to get his ballot back, which is, of course, impossible. But this is a worrying situation because according to these reports, all he was asked to do was to certify that, yes, he's American. I'm surprised that the United States doesn't have a computer database of actual citizens that can be compared with voters. So that immediately when you have a voter who's not a citizen impersonating as a US citizen, you can find it out. But if these reports are true about this particular Chinese national voting in the US election, and of course, it's too late to do anything about it. The vote is already out. It's been dropped. But this is a worrying situation. And I think that's where we need to have foolproof security so that only citizens can vote. As far as the voting numbers are concerned, yes, a huge number of people, nearly 80 million voters have voted. But Donald Trump, even though he had reservations about the whole point about early voting and maybe mail-in voting, he has urged his voters, vote early, mail in if you need to, but please vote. So from that point of view, the fact that you have a huge number of early voters does not mean an advantage for either side. As I said, if a few thousand votes count, then it's very important that all those votes be of US citizens, because otherwise the election could go the way other than what US citizens wanted to go. That's an important factor, Uday, that we need to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yes, let me take that quickly across to you as well, Bradley Thayer, on, of course, now, Bradley. Okay, I believe Rohan Gunaratna has joined us now. I believe we've managed to fix his connection. So let's quickly get in his opening comment and then I'll come back to you, Bradley. Rohan Gunaratna, I was trying to get you in here earlier on, of course, the X factors that are important this election, which could sway the mandate. But also, since you, of course, deal closely with the Middle East, what impact do you believe the Middle East conflict has had on this election and the positions the candidates have taken, and what impact the outcome will have on the war going ahead?
Iran is terrified that if Trump wins, that Trump will support Israel's campaign to dismantle the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. So at this point, there is a considerable concern and a fear on the part of Tehran that Trump will win and Trump will fully support Israel's agenda to attack the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. Now, with regard to Israel, there is significant support. The Jewish community, the Israeli community, they support Trump because they believe it will be good for Israel, especially those parties that are fighting the Seven Front War at this point. So if Trump comes, certainly he has repeatedly said that Iran developing a nuclear capability will be a threat to the United States, will be a global threat. So certainly the United States will give more support to Israel. Of course, Kamala Harris too will support Israel, but I think that Trump, for many reasons, will step up assistance to Israel.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Let me quickly go back across to you, Bradley Thayer, on, of course, the swing states, according to you, which are right now looking the most unpredictable, and are you taking the polls with a pinch of salt, or do you believe they're pretty accurate because things are going down to the wire currently?
Well, thank you. It's a devilishly difficult question, of course, whether the polls are accurate. There's one argument or school of thought that the polls are undercounting Trump voters in the swing states. And if that's true, you could conceivably have a Trump overwhelming victory that is in excess of 300 electoral votes, where he might sweep most or all of the 7 swing states. A second school of thought, of course, is that the polling is more or less accurate, and in which case then, as my colleagues have expressed today, that it will be a very tight election. The critical states are, as have been mentioned, Pennsylvania, because of its weight, because of its electoral count, the electoral votes that it has in our electoral college. But additionally, Michigan and Wisconsin are critical, particularly Wisconsin, which does seem to be leaning towards Trump, and Arizona, which also does seem to be leaning towards Trump. So with respect to the polls, I think what we will see is that there's a great surprise that they grossly undercounted the Trump vote, or they're more or less accurate, and that they're showing the tightness of the race in the 7 critical swing states. And then, of course, after we have the election on Tuesday, we then move into a second stage of where the electoral college process takes over, where there might be, if it is a close election, the audience should expect, of course, considerable legal challenges as we move in through the steps of December 11th, December 17th, when the Electoral College will actually vote, and then January 6th, where the Congress will certify. So if it's a tight election, the drama will not be over, but will continue into a new stage.
Yes, indeed. Lord Ranger, let me quickly draw you back in here on whether you believe this is, perhaps the most polarized election you've seen in the recent past. internationally, but more particularly in the United States, Lord Ranger? And is it more emotion than issues that are weighing heavy on voters' mind this time? Lord Ranger, can you hear me? Okay, I think we're having some connection issues with Lord Ranger. But let me take that back across to you, Daniel. Do you believe this is perhaps the most polarized election we've seen in recent times in the United States of America? And is it true that this time issues are not high on the plate, it's more emotion? Is that accurate or not?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind that in 2016 and 2020, we also had a terribly divided vote, and we've lived in America in a terribly divided country. I don't see that changing no matter who wins, and the legacy of Mr. Trump, no matter what happens, is going to endure in the political landscape of America, which means we can expect that it will continue to be a terribly divided country. There is a lot of emotion involved here, not only because of the issues that are at stake. And the most important issues, of course, are abortion and illegal immigration. Those are the top two issues for a lot of voters, as well as the economy, of course. Depending on which side of the coin that you're on, one is more important than the other. But some semblance of all three of those issues are on voters' minds. Emotions are extremely high. It's been the case, unfortunately, in America for many years now, where you can't sit down with your friends, you can't sit down with your family and go into politics and expect that it's going to be a civil discussion, or expect that you will want to engage with everyone that's at the table. Unfortunately, I live in a country now where if someone is a Harris supporter and someone that they know is a Trump supporter, they may not want to be friends with them anymore, and vice versa. It doesn't matter what other attributes that person may have. It's boiled down in many cases to which side of the political divide are you on. This is a really sad commentary on America and what American society has become. You could argue that this has largely been the result of Mr. Trump stirring the pot in America for the last 8 or 9 years and stirring up all of these issues and all of these emotions. You could also argue that if he hadn't have done that, eventually this would have happened. You could also argue that no matter whether he stirred the pot or not, those issues are going to exist. And the people who feel that they've been underrepresented in American political discourse are going to want to be represented. And once that genie has been let out of the bottle, there's no putting it back. So we have to expect going forward that this type of environment that we're in is just going to endure. And it's got so many ramifications. I want to just comment on one or two things that prior speakers have said. One speaker questioned whether America has a functional electronic database of its voters. Well, of course it does. The issue is that in America, we have 50 states which operate like 50 different countries. And this creates terrible problems in terms of how we count the vote, how we tabulate the vote, how we keep track of voters. And when you've got 50 different states doing 50 different approaches, there's bound to be problems and you can have anomalies. But it is worth saying also that there's been very, very few instances of illegal immigrants successfully voting in America. One way or another, they are generally caught, and there's only been a few examples of when they haven't been caught. Yeah. So the idea of making this, a huge issue in the vote just is irrelevant.
American democracy vis-a-vis, say, Indian democracy, because we don't have this in India, do we, Professor Nalapat? Thankfully, and America likes to lecture, the world on democracy and on human rights and other issues, but they need to look inwards. If there are cases like this of foreigners voting, of malpractices being alleged, of these paper ballots and other systems being questioned by candidates, this doesn't really happen in India, does it?
Uday, fortunately it does not. And that's why you had a situation where the exit polls predicted a huge victory for the BJP. And instead, frankly, the BJP only narrowly escaped the result that Rahul Gandhi had predicted for it, which is 220 Lok Sabha seats. The party got 240. So it's very clear that, that of course, one, the exit polls can go wrong. And secondly, that Indian democracy is working very well, because the diatribe against India was that, oh, it's not a democracy. Every institution has been captured. Government has got full control. Well, in that case, are you telling me the government ensured that its own tally in the lower house of parliament went to a level which is dangerously low? I mean, that is absurd. So I think the 2024 election proved the soundness of Indian democracy. There's one issue talking about countries today. Russia. Trump and Harris are very different on Russia. Trump is very clear he doesn't want to spend money on Ukraine. And I think a lot of US voters, especially those at the lower ends of the economic level, they're going to say, why are you spending all this money on Ukraine and Zelensky when we need it a lot? I mean, we are more important. We need it. Or is Ukraine more important to you? So I think, frankly, where Russia is concerned, I think they would prefer Donald Trump for a simple reason, not the absurd allegation that he's a Russian agent, which was made by Hillary Clinton. And frankly, one problem that Harris is facing, a lot of her campaign pitch has been talking negative things about Trump. Now, Hillary Clinton, the same thing, and she didn't end up very well, finally. So I always believe it's better to stress on what you can do, stress on the positives, and don't try and tar your opponent in a very negative way. Now, that way, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance had a very civilized debate among each other. So Russia is an important, Iran. Well, the fact is, Netanyahu has more or less come to the conclusion that it is possible to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. Well, one thing I can tell you very clearly, if there is a huge degrading of that capacity, it's going to affect the mullahs in Iran very badly. The clerical regime is not popular among the people. And if you have a major military debacle in Iran, the clerical regime is likely to be quite shaky. So Iran, yes, will be watching very carefully, and for its own reasons. It's ridiculous to say that Kamala Harris is pro-Iran or Trump is pro-Russia. No, they're both Americans. They're looking at what they think is American interest. But if Trump believes with Netanyahu that, look, you can take out or degrade practically the most effective parts of Iran's nuclear arsenal, that I think is going to shake the clerical regime. And certainly the clerics are therefore certainly not not supporters of a Trump presidency. Thank you, Uday.
Absolutely. Professor Nalapath, stay with us. Let me take that to Rohan Gunaratna. Rohan Gunaratna, how important are issues this US election? Or do you believe that this is a polarized election where emotion is high and not issues so much?
Is very decisive at this point for the international community, because the world is polarizing, countries are fragmenting, and the United States position, the candidate that is going to be elected is going to decide on global stability and security in the coming months, coming years. So the international community will closely watch what is happening in the United States and the positions that will be adopted by these two candidates. As we speak today, we can see very clearly BRICS emerging as a very significant entity. We have also seen some difficulties on the part of the Europeans of working with the Americans. We have also seen, with regard to India, new developments, rapprochement with China, and perhaps in the future rapprochement even with Pakistan. So the US will have to navigate very carefully in the coming months and coming years to make sure that there is global security and global stability. So this is an election everyone is watching, not only the Americans, but the whole world.
Yes, absolutely. Let me quickly take that across to you as well, on, of course, this very important aspect, Ambassador Manju Seth, of course, this being a very different election from the rest. It's, of course, the most closely contested ones. But do you believe this is an election that is very different from the rest? Is that something you agree with? Also, Ambassador Manju Seth, what impact is this election going to have on foreign policy of the US going ahead?
Yes, it is very, very different from previous elections. And the world, the geopolitical shifts taking place across the world. The world is a very different place today. The US is also very different. And I think all the factors, as mentioned by the speakers also, they're going to be all important factors in determining the future of America. And of course, it's going to impact the entire world, who wins. And the foreign policies, they will, as mentioned again by previous speakers, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis the two wars, they're going to be different, depending on who is in office. Former President Donald Trump has said that he would end the wars. He wants to take America out of the wars. He would support Israel in its endeavors and maybe, targeting Iran in some way. But the current wars that are going on, he has said that he would like to end them. He wants America out of those wars. So that policy will remain unchanged. Yes, with China, again, there will be some change. If the Democrats come, they will continue engagement with China while also trying to counter it, in Quad along with its partners, Quad partners, and also on trade. On trade, also there's going to be some changes, especially because if former President Donald Trump comes. He has spoken of a little more, in a closed kind of policy that he would follow. He wants to make America great again, and he wants to make manufacturing again important in America, create jobs. Of course, both governments, both administrations will want to create jobs, but they would like to impose, especially former President Donald Trump has said he will impose tariffs to ensure that products from outside are more expensive when they come into the US, to encourage local manufacturing. But that is true of most countries, most important countries these days. They are becoming a little more inward-looking. And as far as the Biden administration, the Harris administration will be, I think they will carry forward most of the current policies of the Biden government, though she has said that she will move away from most of them. But I think the policies, major policies, will remain the same, foreign policies, vis-a-vis other countries. So we have to, though she has said that she would like to end the war in Gaza, but on what terms, what conditions, what terms and conditions? Because she cannot not afford to continue support to Israel. Yes, a negotiated settlement is the only way. Talks and diplomacy are the only way to find a solution. And if she succeeds in that, I think that would be a major achievement, not only for her, but for the entire region, for the world. And as far as Ukraine and the Russia war goes, I think it's been going on too long, and I think there's a lot of fatigue, even in the US. And whoever comes to power will have to rethink, I think, their policy on Ukraine. And as far as other countries are concerned, I think by and large, the foreign policy approach of the US administration, whoever is in power, will be, as I said earlier also, will be to first ensure American interests, irrespective of with which country, with which region or which organization they are dealing with, and to also, I think, to try and safeguard their current numero uno position that they are at. They would not like to be challenged by anyone. China has already begun to show some indications of challenge, and again, action has been swiftly taken by the American governments to engage with China, but at the same time, remove all the supply chains, to diversify the supply chains away from China, and which will hurt China. And so I think they have got this clear in their minds. First, both administrations, whoever comes, both parties, whoever comes will ensure American interest first, but yes, slightly different ways. But I think the Quad will continue, the current engagement with India will continue, and with some, back and forth. because even Donald Trump has said that India charges huge tariffs, and we will, ensure that we put very high tariffs on. I'm sorry, India charges a lot of tariff, imposes a lot of tariffs, so we will do the same, kind of reciprocity. So I think there will be some changes, but overall, if you look at American foreign policy, it will not radically change vis-a-vis India, but yes, with some other countries, we can expect some change. With the two wars, with Russia, with China, there will be some changes, I think. But
Yes.
overall, US interest will be first, paramount.
Absolutely. What about, Bradley Thayer, these celebrity endorsements for Kamala Harris? What is going to be the impact of these celebrity endorsements? Are they going to sway the public in the US? Also, the fact that, Elon Musk has been backing Trump so vociferously. How much of an impact is that going to make? He also came out, of course, with some cash incentives as well for voters. That's also something unique to this particular election. What's going to be the impact of him on the Trump campaign?
Certainly. Well, with respect to the first question of the impact of celebrity endorsements, it's expected that particularly Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris, and she has some influence, considerable influence with younger Americans. So the so-called Swifties. So Taylor Swift's endorsement, I think, is the most significant with respect to Harris's campaign, and that should expect to have some tangible effect, that is, in terms of ballots cast for Harris. With respect to the other celebrity endorsements are, I think, more niche or will be more attenuated in their effect of other celebrities, for example, film stars or musicians who've endorsed Harris. With respect to Musk, Elon Musk, this is very significant because X, formerly known as Twitter, of course, is a platform that most Americans use. Of course, it's a global phenomenon, of course, but most Americans use X to some degree for news, for information, and for sharing thoughts and opinions in every respect. But of course, most importantly, the political thoughts and opinions. So Musk's endorsement of Trump, I think, is very significant. And his platform X, which is allowing exchange, which is allowing essentially information to be exchanged without the filters of other social media, for example, Facebook or other platforms, again, underscores that significance. With respect to the tactics that he's employing in Pennsylvania, again, to stress the point, a critical swing state, I think that this is an issue that is one which has received considerable attention, although I think it will have the effect of not having the impact perhaps on Pennsylvania voters, who seem to be, as you have stressed at the outset of the program, over 78 million Americans have already voted in this election. And by election day tomorrow, Tuesday, November 5th, that number will be even significantly higher. So that is a remarkable change in American electoral history, shows an enormous turnout. Elon Musk's tactics, I think, are less significant than his endorsement of Trump and the platform of X for conveying information between and among American voters. That, I think, is a critical difference and very unlike 2020, for example, where Twitter at that time under Jack Dorsey had a very different tact.
Okay. Daniel Wagner.
I want to jump in for a minute.
Yes, Professor.
And talk about this,
Sure.
A point was made about very few votes of illegal citizens.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact, the emphasis is it a foolproof system or not? Of course, we all have electronics. Almost every country in the world does. But the question is, even if there are a limited number, it's not the number that matters, it's the principle that only citizens should vote. So that is my point, quite frankly, Uday. And I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to state that clearly. The emphasis is on foolproof, and the election system has to be foolproof. in a democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joyita also made that point interestingly in a previous debate, that she was quite horrified and shocked to hear an analyst on a US on a US channel, actually an anchor or journalist saying that oh, so what, it was just a few ballots and not too many. But as you said, it's about how foolproof the system is. Even one illegal vote or two illegal votes is bad enough. Let me quickly draw back in Daniel Wagner on the point of course, now how soon we're going to get the result. Daniel Wagner, do you expect this to go into a few days, or do you expect the result in the first 24 hours after voting concludes? It's going to go down to the wire. Do you expect challenges, recounts? Do you believe this will take a few days before it is final and dusted?
The issue isn't it. The issue is ultimately, unless there is a blowout on either side, I don't think we're going to see a result on Tuesday night in America. And in fact, if you look at previous election history, you will note that sometimes it takes days or even weeks to determine the actual outcome. And with the stakes as high as they are here, I'd be very surprised if we have an actual blowout, or whether we have the answer on Tuesday night. If you understand that both sides have had lawyers in many of the swing states camped out there already for days and weeks in preparation for what may be coming, the challenges and the questions about legitimacy and accuracy of vote counts. Both sides are prepared for this. I think if there is a blowout, the question is, will the other side also acknowledge it? And that ultimately is the biggest question in my mind about whether the sanctity of the American vote and the legitimacy of the process will be honored by both sides. I just wanted to say one word also about Trump and foreign policy. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump has made foreign policy a personal issue. It's almost as if, this is something that he personally wants or doesn't want. And if you think about how he has reduced the foreign policy process to a transactional process, and often a question simply of money, it is a very dangerous road to go down. In July 2016, I wrote for the very first time in the American media, in the Huffington Post, that I thought Mr. Trump had narcissistic personality disorder. This was subsequently said by tens of thousands of psychological professionals, that he has this disorder. Someone at the helm with that disorder is extremely dangerous. And the idea that he has in his own mind a Superman shirt underneath his dress shirt, and that he alone can save the world, and that he can do it in one day, and that he can do it with one arm tied behind his back. It's just absurd, but it's dangerous. And that's one of my biggest concerns about his potential return to the office.
Okay. Rohan Gunaratna, depending on the verdict, how likely is it that either side will accept it? Do you believe recounts, challenges are in the offing? Do you also believe perhaps there's going to be rhetoric on either side depending on what the outcome is, if it is indeed close?
Certainly, this is a very acrimonious election. The outcome will mobilize certain parties, especially the right-wing groups, the extremist right-wing groups in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand. All these groups are currently watching these developments, and they can become more active. They will no longer be just extremists. They will go into violence too. So I think that it is so important to maintain security and stability of the United States during this period, and for the international security and intelligence community to monitor how the right-wing extremism will rise in the United States and globally. Thank you.
Okay, I can see a breaking input flashing there on our screens that former President Clinton has also campaigned for Harris. what kind of impact will that make or not? We'll perhaps know tomorrow. Professor Nalapat, all the star campaigners going out now further and further in the swing states. We believe former President Clinton now coming out to campaign for Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will be holding rallies in 2 of the key swing states, 2 mega rallies. How important is this last-minute blitz going to be for either side?
Well, actually, Uday, you may be surprised, I may be surprised, and you may have what our friends are calling a blowout election, with one of the candidates getting around 300 plus electoral votes, or close to that. Much more than 270, maybe 20 more than 272. But the fact is, if that happens, I quite agree with Daniel Wagner, this should be accepted. They should not fight it, because it's time to put this division, behind the United States, the people of the United States, and it's time to have faith in the electoral process overall, because the electoral process is the bedrock of democracy. And if you don't have faith in the electoral process, well, the question is, what is going to be its impact on the way democracy functions in your country? America is way too big a country, so is India, by the way too important a country for the process, frankly, to be vitiated in any manner. And I think if there is a blowout election, and it may happen, elections that were blowouts in the polls became close and vice versa. If that happens, whoever loses should accept the result gracefully. Thank you, Uday.
But how likely is that going to be, Ambassador Seth, particularly if it's a close election? Do you also believe that this could, take days before there is some sort of final conclusion?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yes, I think, yes, it might take some days. The whole process is such.
And I'd like you also, since you've seen the Indian election also very, very closely, just talk about how different it is from the way the US election has panned out with these illegal votes that Professor Nalapat cited, and also, of course, Donald Trump, crying foul. Also others questioning how this early system works, with certain states having different rules to others. In fact, certain states also have different rules within their counties.
Absolutely. I think it's very complicated and there's lack of clarity, and maybe there was some reason earlier, I think, but in today's open era, I should say, where the news, where everything is transparent, I think it's important that everybody should know what is happening where and what is exactly the process. I think because of this complicated methodology which they have adopted, it may have been suitable years ago. I'm not sure it continues to be suitable today, but it is for the American people to decide. And there's also been talk about, when we mentioned about the illegal voters, about having an identity card, a voter identity card to ensure that and former President Trump has spoken about that, saying, why can't we have identity cards? Why are the Democrats against it? So, this kind of issue will be there, and unless the parties concerned, that the Senate and the House all decide that, and the people decide that there needs to be change to make it more transparent and not let this uncertainty. Of course, it's going to be only in next January that the next new president will take office. But the fact that it's such a long, drawn-out process, after voting is finished, I think counting should be like in India, as you're well aware, where we have a very robust election voting system. I think and quick, results are out, and everybody and representatives of all parties are there while the counting is on. So I think that kind of, they're also, I'm sure they are there even when the counting is going on in the US. But it has to be a little more, less opaque, let me put it, from currently what it is, and giving the swing states and the electoral college so much of weightage. I don't know.
Do you believe that's something? Do you believe that's something that's in the offing, Bradley Thayer? This dead heat, this close election going down to the wire, possibly these challenges on either side?
I think without question that if it is close election, there will be challenges. I think it's important if your audience might pay attention to Virginia and New Hampshire. If they are looking like going for Trump, then there are key indications that it may be an overwhelming Trump victory. in addition to Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Michigan, which are in the eastern time zone of the United States and where results might be known first. But as my colleagues have stressed, that the process will be a long one, as the secretaries of state of the state of Michigan and of Arizona have said, that is those individuals tasked with running the election and counting, have said that it will be a long process, as we expect in Nevada, it will be as well. My colleagues have also stressed that there will be legal challenges, and if it is close, then I think that is a certainty. There are deadlines, however, December 11th, December 17th, and January 6th are key deadlines where there are points. And the court system, of course, the Supreme Court, it's quite likely if there are legal challenges that the Supreme Court will intervene with dispatch in these courses, as we saw in the election of 2000 between Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, and George W. Bush. So we should expect that if it is close, results will take some time to know, days to know, and we should expect that the process will enter a new stage, if you will, of the competition between the respective parties. However, there are firm deadlines imposed by the Electoral College system that I'm sure the court system is well aware of and will ensure that issues are adjudicated by those dates. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Since we have extended the duration of this telecast, I'd like you to come back in. Ambassador Seth, I interrupted you when you were making that point. Please do go ahead, elaborate. Ambassador Manju? Ambassador Manju Seth, can you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost Ambassador Manju Seth there. Okay, let me quickly, go back across to Professor Madhav Nalapath on, of course, also the aspect, Professor Nalapath, of these, early voters. It's been a record-breaking turnout this time of early voters that have come out to vote. In fact, that's something that, of course, is seen often, but this time the figure of early voters has been truly historic. It's broken records, is what US media outlets are saying. What do you make of that, and what bearing is that likely to have on the upcoming result?
Well, it depends on whom the voter has voted for, and can't be certain of that until the votes are fully counted. And if it's a close contest, as our friends have said, it may take days and days. But having said that, it could also be a blowout election. And in that case, there's no question of any deadline not being met. My point is that then a party should not attempt the impossible of challenging a blowout election because he or she does not like the opposing candidate or the opposing party. So I think in that situation, I think it's incumbent for both the big parties, Democratic and Republican, to accept the result gracefully, and rather than create a problem which has to be resolved in the Supreme Court or in the House of Representatives. Certainly that also will go to the Supreme Court. But I think if it's a blowout election, I think it should be gracefully accepted by both sides. If it's a narrow election with a few thousand votes making all the difference, obviously it's going to be challenged. Like Al Gore, for example, he gracefully withdrew at the last moment, even though it was a very close election, because they were nearing the deadline. But quite frankly, I mean, he had a quite strong case where the election was concerned, but in the interest of American democracy, he withdrew. So I think Al Gore set a very good example for honoring the process and for ensuring strength and stability in American democracy. We are seeing some perception of shakiness there, and I hope, as a friend of the United States for a very long time, that perception dissipates and that Americans accept the result gracefully if the result is overwhelmingly in favor of one candidate or the other, and not a very close result. Thank you.
As well, Ambassador Bhashpati Mukherjee, former diplomat, who I believe has also joined the broadcast now. Ambassador Mukherjee, as far as, of course, the election is concerned in the United States of America, the polls, of course, say it's extremely close. It's boiling down to the swing states. What do you believe could ultimately determine the issues, the factors, the outcome, and which, according to you right now, is looking like the most unpredictable swing state?
Actually, it is an unpredictable election because the voter in US is highly polarized. But if you ask me about the issues which are of importance to all, I would put the state of the economy and the whole issue of immigration, illegal immigration, as two issues which concern Americans across the political divide. It counts for much more than the debate for and against abortion, where it is also forgotten that there are a large number of women voters who are against abortion. That may be surprising for an Indian audience because we believe that abortion here is almost like a fundamental right for women, given the state of violence against women in India, etc. But in United States, there are large lobbies of women who do not favor abortion. So their votes will not go to Kamala Harris, it will go to Trump. Similarly, there are some states, swing states, where she seems to have improved her position, etc. But given the fact that in the United States, you can win the popular vote but still lose the election, I would say that everything depends on the Electoral College. As far as the popular vote is concerned, in my perspective, the greatest handicap of the incumbent Vice President, Mrs. Kamala Harris, is that she is burdened with the negativity around President Biden's presidency, where she is being held accountable, maybe sometimes unfairly, on issues where the present president is perceived by some not to have done well. That also includes, for instance, highly polarizing issues like should the United States continue to fund the Ukraine war the way it is, etc. And the position with regard to Israel and its conflict in Gaza and against and in Lebanon, because there is a very strong Jewish lobby which funds both parties, and the Biden administration, rightly or wrongly, has been perceived to be much more tough on Israel than the Republicans. So there again, it's really, as you rightly pointed out, Uday, an election that is going to go down to the wire.
Yes.
But there are also conflicting reports that it could even be an easy win for one side or the other. It's because the kind of assessments that are coming, some are showing a deadlocked or a very tight election. Others are showing something quite different. So it's a little bit like even in India, where there are so many what we call in English election pundits.
Absolutely.
And sometimes what they say is correct, but sometimes what they say is totally wrong. So I think we really need to keep this one, boiling, as they say, until the results start coming in.
Well, we are less than 24 hours away from the election, from, of course, voting day. Can Kamala Harris pull off a historic win? Will the Trump card stand triumphant? The voters shall decide how America's governance will unfold for the next 4 years. All eyes, of course, are on them for the big day of the 5th of November. The voice of the voters in the US is all that matters now. In fact, let's take a look at those voices.
Oh, I mean, our economy was better when Trump was in office. Everything was better. But I want our open borders, biggest mistake ever. But if you look at our economy, look at the grocery prices, I mean, all of it. People can't afford to live. My daughter can't afford to buy a house right now because the interest rates are super high.
Yeah, honestly, I think whoever wins, I think there's going to be some backlash either way. I think if Trump wins, there's going to be some chaos, there's going to be some riots, and obviously we saw, I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy behind what happened on January 6th 4 years ago, but I could potentially see some Trump supporters being pretty upset about what could happen if Harris wins as well. So,
North Carolina, it's going to come down to the wire, so we're here to support the first colored woman to become president in our country. I'm beyond excited.
Democratic Party in general has been running on a lot of empty promises. I know that if the Democrats wanted to control the main spear of the liberal front, they would do that. They would align fully with the liberal policies. They wouldn't have almost a conservative stance on Palestine. They wouldn't have no response to abortion. They wouldn't be so ticky-tacky with racial issues. If they were to commit to actually being the social justice party that they're painted as, I think they would be able to sway more voters in. It wouldn't be no need for a Green Party.
I'll be voting against the abortion thing just because, I'm pro-life. I believe in the sanctity of life. I believe in exceptions, much like President Trump, but I do think that we need to protect life whenever we can.
And I think that the abortion measure being on the ballot could hypothetically help the Democratic Party because it is an issue that people feel passionately about. They want women to have the right to choose. They want the freedom from government interference.
All right, Alexander Slater, in fact, is also with us now, former Managing Director, US-India Business Council. Let me quickly draw you in here, Alexander, on, of course, this US election, which has really gone down to the wire. Is it a different election from others that you've seen in the recent past? Are issues dominating this time, or is it polarized? Do you believe emotion is weighing heavier on voters' minds? What's your take, Alexander, and how close do you believe it is on ground?
Well, thanks so much for having me on today. I really appreciate being here. Having spent a significant time in India and the United States, I think it's important to be able to share across the bilateral relationship the state of things in both countries. On the issue of the election, I think it's actually quite close. I think the pollsters have it right here, and that you do have a deeply divided electorate, at least in the swing states. There really are 7 states that are going to hold the key to this election, and probably really just 3, being Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If they go Democratic, as they traditionally do, it seems very likely that we'll have a President Harris at the end of the day, Tuesday. But of course, the polls suggest that in those states, it's a very, very close election, and that if there's going to be any defections from those, the traditional voting patterns of those states, then it might go the other way. So at least in terms of the states that are the swing states, it's quite close. In terms of the popular vote, I don't think it will be close. It seems like that Vice President Harris has a lead in the popular vote. If you look back historically on the last 8 elections in the United States, the Republicans have only won the popular vote once, and that's in 2004 with George W. Bush. Even in the prior victories, George W. Bush in 2000, and then President Trump in 2016, they both lost the popular votes. And so the popular vote tends to go Democratic in recent history. And so I think we'll see that pattern repeat again. But again, swing states that really matter due to the Electoral College. In terms of what's dominating, I think it's a combination of things, and depends on what part of the electorate you look at. The United States is a very large country, but much like India, although not as large as India. And so for different sectors of the voters, different segments of the voters, different issues matter. I do think, when we heard from some of the voters that you all interviewed, some of the key issues did come up. Inflation and cost of living through the pandemic has been a significant issue this time around, even as inflation in the United States has largely abated. There has been a significant run-up in prices over the last 4 or 5 years, and people still have sticker shock when they go to the grocery store, for example. Then there is a large segment of the population that remains quite animated over the Supreme Court decision to end the national right to abortion. And so have a state-by-state approach, which is resulting in significant restrictions on the rights of women to have abortions. And that has made a large segment of the population become quite engaged in a way that they may not have been before. We see this a bit in the early voting, or at least, in the polls that suggest that women voters, there's a huge gender gap, at least in the voting patterns here, where
yes,
women largely in favor of Vice President Harris, and then you have some men, more men that are supporting President Trump. And so I think those are some of the issues that are dominating here.
Absolutely. Let me get you in here now, Professor Saurabh, fellow JNU, into the discussion. Professor Saurabh, now, as far as, of course, you know, this election is concerned, what is the Indian viewpoint on it? You know, are we going to see a change in India-US relationship post this verdict? Is there going to be a reset? What is the Indian viewpoint on this election? How should Indians be viewing this presidential poll and its possible outcomes? Professor Saurabh, can you hear me? Okay, I think we are having some connection issues with Professor Saurabh. But Adit Kothari, why don't you take that, founder Indic Society? I believe you've also joined us now. Before I come to you, okay, I believe there's some connection issues with Adit as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, why don't you come in here on the Indians' viewpoint, Indian viewpoint on the election? How should Indians be viewing this presidential poll in the United States of America and its eventual outcome? You know, will there be a reset in US-Indian relations, or will there be continuity? What's your perspective on this big pressing issue on minds of people in South Asia? Ambassador Mukherjee.
In the first instance, as a professional diplomat and coming from a democratic country like the United States, I believe that the selection of the American president depends on the will of the American people. They have the right to decide, and they will decide. As far as India is concerned, from my personal perspective, I do believe that the present incumbent vice president comes with a lot of baggage vis-a-vis India. Being of Indian origin is not necessarily, how do I put it delicately, is not necessarily a strong point as far as the India-US strategic partnership is concerned. In fact, on the contrary, as we've seen with Rishi Sunak in UK, for instance, we've had much stronger and better relationships with British prime ministers who are completely divorced from Indian origin, totally 100% Brit. So it's not a symbiotic thing that because you're of Indian origin, you're going to have a great relationship. On the contrary, you'll be watched, your pronouncements will be watched, you will be much more careful about what you say about India. You will not have that handicap if you don't have an Indian connection. That's my first point. Secondly, as far as Kamala Harris is concerned, she will also be burdened with some of the negativity vis-a-vis India emanating from the middle and lower levels of the US State Department that we've witnessed, especially in the last few months. A negativity emanating from the Biden presidency, which clearly has not been able to ensure that the US State Department gives out a unified message from its top to the bottom level with regard to the importance of the India-US strategic partnership for both countries. She will be burdened with that perception, which is a perception which we in India have, particularly professional diplomats, politicians, etc. That perception does not hold true for President Trump. From that perspective, and given the fact that during the Trump presidency, we had a pretty easy ride as far as the strategic partnership was concerned, and because traditionally Republicans have a pragmatic business approach vis-a-vis the India-US partnership, as opposed to Democrats who bring in a lot of messy stuff which causes conflict. For instance, state of the human rights, condition status of women in India, the caste system, child labor, and various other issues, bringing in conditionalities into trade agreements, etc. These do not augur well for a strategic partnership that is supposed to set the tone for both countries as we move on. Yes. And as it becomes a different country by 2040.
Point taken. I believe Adit Kothari has also joined us back now, founder Indic Society. Adit Kothari, you know, as far as, of course, now the X factors are concerned, what are those going to be? It's boiling down to the swing states. What will sway those states? What's the X factor going to be? Which state out of those, you know, crucial ones are you looking at as perhaps the most unpredictable, which could influence the outcome?
taking the narrative ahead from where Alexander dropped it, he mentioned 3 states. I'm going to boil it down to one, Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is going to be the key one to look out for. From a deciding factor perspective, I think President Trump has used 2 of the I's in his election narrative, which is basically inflation and immigration. And that seems to have resonated massively with the electorate that he's specifically targeting. If I put them down, it's basically the so-called union workers, the non-college graduates, the have-nots, people who feel that they are worse off, or rather they've been left worse off over the course of the last 4 years when it comes to them being part of the economic churning and the economic process, and they basically believe that they were better off between 2016 and 2020. So all of these issues, seems to resonate with that sort of electorate, and I think they're going to be the key sort of voters. Pennsylvania is a bit of a tricky one because it does have a significant amount of Puerto Rican voter base as well, and I don't think whoever's behind the Trump strategy thought about it much when they platformed Tony Hinchcliffe during the New York rally. I mean, every word was said in poor taste, and it demonstrated bad judgment not only on his part but also in terms of on the part of the strategy team that are basically working for Trump at this point. So could that be basically one of the issues that the Pennsylvanian voters might be ticked about? That only time will basically tell. But
so
I just wanted to add one
keeping
dimension.
A close eye on. Yes, okay, we've run out of time. I'm afraid on this telecast. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us for your perspectives on the US elections.
For more such videos, subscribe to the Newsx YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.